My friend Josh and I were heading to a music festival in Asheville, taking what we thought was a shortcut through the mountains. By nightfall, Shortcut had turned into hopelessly lost. The winding roads were pitch black, my phone's GPS had died hours ago, and the last sign of civilization had been a boarded-up gas station. Josh was in the passenger seat, oblivious, the glow of his phone painting his face blue as he scrolled through social media. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Just as I was about to pull over and sleep in the car, a soft, hazy light appeared around a curve. It was a vacancy sign, its looping script reading, "The Whispering Pines Motor Court." It was an old-fashioned single-story motel, the kind with a little office out front. It looked clean enough, and at that point, anything with 4 walls and a lock would do. The woman behind the front desk gave us a wide, fixed smile. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a solid-looking helmet. "Just the 2 of you boys tonight?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet. "Well, you are in for a treat. I've got the perfect room for you. Number 10, right at the very end. It's our quietest." The parking lot was a ghost town, so I knew she wasn't short on rooms, but I was too drained to argue. I paid her in cash. "You all have a safe and restful night," she said, the smile never wavering. Room 10 was at the far end of the property, surrounded on 3 sides by dark, dense woods. The room itself was unremarkable, worn but clean, with the faint, pleasant smell of cedar. The only strange detail was the deadbolt. It was a massive, brand-new piece of hardware, the kind you'd see on a high-security door, and it looked completely out of place on the flimsy wood veneer door. "Whoa," Josh said, poking at it. "Guess they're serious about security out here." He tossed his bag on one of the beds and was immediately lost in his phone again. I was asleep almost as soon as my head hit the pillow. A few hours later, a sound pulled me from a deep sleep. It was a child crying. This wasn't a toddler throwing a tantrum. It was a raw, panicked sobbing that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was coming from the room right next door. The crying was interrupted by the low rumble of a man's voice. I couldn't make out the words, just an angry, threatening tone. The child would go quiet for a moment, then the heartbreaking sobs would start again. "Dude, you hear that?" Josh whispered from the other bed. He'd finally put his phone down. "Yeah," I said, sitting up. "Sounds bad." My first instinct was to go over there, to knock on the door, to do something. But what if the guy got violent? "Man, I don't know," Josh said, echoing my thoughts. "Sounds like we should just stay out of it. Not our business." He was probably right. Still, I couldn't relax. The crying went on for a few more minutes, then it just stopped. It didn't fade out, it cut off, as if a plug had been pulled. The sudden silence was more disturbing than the noise had been. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sound of my own heart beating in the oppressive quiet. I finally dozed off, only to be woken again by the sound of a vehicle pulling up outside. I slid out of bed and moved to the window, carefully parting the curtains. A plain white van with no side windows was parked in front of room 11. The driver's door opened and a big guy, built like a linebacker, got out. He walked right up to the door next to ours and, without knocking, used a key to get in. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't some family problem. This was something else entirely. I stayed at the window, my muscles tensed. A minute later, the door to room 11 opened again. The big man walked out, followed by the woman from the front desk, the one with the perfect blonde hair. They didn't have a child with them. They didn't have any bags. They calmly got into the van and drove off into the night. It hit me like a physical blow. The overly sweet welcome. The insistence on giving us the quiet room at the end. The heavy-duty lock. The crying hadn't been real. It was a recording. It was bait. They were waiting for one of us to go next door, to be a hero. They were counting on someone hearing that desperate sound and stepping out to help. The big lock wasn't to keep a threat out. It was to keep one of us in while the other walked right into their trap. "Josh, get up. Now. We have to go." "What are you talking about?" "Just get your stuff. Don't make any noise." He saw the look on my face and didn't argue. We moved in the dark, stuffing our clothes into our bags. Every rustle of fabric, every soft thud of a shoe hitting the floor, sounded like an explosion. I moved the chair I'd wedged under the knob and slowly, silently unlocked the door. We slipped out into the cold mountain air. We walked, fast but not running, across the gravel lot to my car. My hand was shaking so badly, it took me 3 tries to get the key in the door. We got in, and I started the engine. The sound seemed to roar through the silent night. As I sped out of the lot and back onto the winding road, I didn't look back. We drove for 10 minutes in complete silence before either of us could speak. Then up ahead, I saw a pair of headlights coming toward us. As the vehicle got closer, a knot of ice formed in my gut. It was a white, windowless van. It swept past us, and in my rearview mirror, I saw its brake lights flash. Then, its turn signal blinked on as it swung back into the entrance of the Whispering Pines. They were coming back for us. We didn't stop until we were on the outskirts of Knoxville, in the bright, fluorescent safety of a gas station. I called the state police and told them everything. They sent a car out, but it was too late. The Whispering Pines Motor Court was deserted. The office was unlocked, and in room 11, they found nothing but a small speaker on the bedside table, ready for the next person who decided to take the scenic route. The drive across Nevada is a special kind of lonely. At 20 years old, I was halfway through a 12-hour trip back home from college for winter break, pushing my rattling Toyota through a landscape so empty it felt like the world had forgotten it was there. By 10 p.m., the coffee had worn off and my eyelids felt like they were lined with sand. Every flickering headlight in my rearview mirror made me jump. I promised myself I'd pull over at the next sign of life. That sign came in the form of a buzzing, pale blue neon sign that read Starlight INN, some letters long dead. It was a single-story, L-shaped building sitting 100 yards off the highway, surrounded by nothing but gravel and sagebrush. The parking lot held only one other vehicle, a rust-eaten pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved since the Reagan administration. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to keep driving, but my body was done. One night, I told myself, just a few hours of sleep. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke and pine sol. Behind the counter, a thin old man with a deeply lined face was wiping the same spot on the laminate countertop with a greasy rag, over and over. He didn't look up until I cleared my throat. "Just one?" he asked, his voice raspy. I nodded. $28. Cash. He finally met my eyes, and they were pale, almost colorless. "Room 7. Right at the corner. Just you on this end of the building tonight. Nice and quiet for you." The way he said it felt less like a reassurance, and more like a statement of fact. I handed over the cash, took the key, a real metal key on a worn plastic tag, and walked out into the cold desert air. Room 7 was at the very end of the building, its door facing the empty expanse of the desert. Inside, the air was cold and still. The room was clean in a superficial way. The bed was made with a thin, faded quilt, but the carpet had dark stains near the bathroom, and the air held a faint, sharp scent of bleach. I locked the door, wedged the room's only chair under the knob, and left my duffel bag on the floor. My stomach was growling, so I decided to drive to a 24-hour gas station a couple of miles back for some snacks. I was gone for maybe 15 minutes. When I got back, I unlocked the door, pushed the chair aside, and stepped inside. For a moment, everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Then I noticed the book I'd left on the nightstand. It was a paperback novel, and I distinctly remembered leaving it face down to mark my page. It was now closed, sitting perfectly square with the edge of the table. A cold thread of unease pulled tight in my stomach. I scanned the room. The window was still locked. My bag was untouched. The bathroom was empty. It was such a small thing, but it was wrong. I told myself I was just tired, misremembering. But I knew I wasn't. Someone had been in the room. I tried to shake it off, climbing into bed with my clothes still on. I lay there in the dark, listening to the hum of the ancient mini-fridge and the sound of the wind scraping against the building. That's when I heard the other sound. It came from the room next door, room 8. It was a rhythmic, metallic scraping. It was faint, but it was steady. I thought about what the clerk had said. Just you on this end of the building. I lay still, listening. The sound was methodical, like someone was patiently working at something. Maybe sharpening a tool, or trying to pry something open. It went on for what felt like an hour. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I reached for the old rotary phone on the nightstand to call the front desk. There was no dial tone. The line was completely dead. My unease curdled into genuine fear. I slipped out of bed and crept to the wall that separated my room from the next. The scraping had stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse. My room had one of those adjoining doors, a feature I'd never liked. I checked the bolt on my side. It was thick and firmly slid into place. I knelt down and put my ear to the crack at the bottom of the door, listening. Nothing. Just dead, heavy silence. I backed away and went to my own door, peering through the peephole. The parking lot was empty and dark, lit only by the sputtering blue sign. I watched for a few minutes, seeing nothing. I was about to turn away when a figure emerged from the lobby. It was the old clerk. He walked slowly along the concrete walkway, his posture stooped. He wasn't heading back to the lobby or to the old pickup. He was walking toward my end of the motel. He stopped outside room 8, the room with the noise. I watched, my breath held tight in my chest, as he pulled a key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and slipped inside, closing it quietly behind him. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew the man at the front desk was a part of it. The quiet end of the building wasn't empty. It was occupied, and the clerk had lied. I had to get out. Moving with a silence I didn't know I was capable of, I grabbed my keys and my wallet from the nightstand. I left the duffel bag, left everything else. I slid the chair away from the door as gently as I could. My hand was on the doorknob when I heard a new sound. It came from the adjoining door. A metallic sound. The sound of a bolt sliding on the other side. My body moved before my brain caught up. I didn't wait to hear the knob turn. I yanked my own door open and sprinted. The cold night air hit my face like a slap. The sound of my own breathing was ragged in my ears. I didn't look back. My fingers fumbled with the car keys, dropping them once on the gravel before I managed to unlock the door and throw myself inside. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse. Gravel sprayed from under the tires as I tore out of the parking spot. As the car swiveled around to face the highway, my headlights cut across the motel, sweeping across the row of doors. For a split second, the beam illuminated the doorway of my room, number 7. The door was wide open, and standing there were two figures, the old clerk and a much larger man standing beside him. They weren't moving. They were just watching me go. I floored it, hitting the highway at a dangerous speed. I didn't slow down until the blue glow of the Starlight was nothing but a speck in my rearview mirror. 20 miles down the road, I pulled over at a brightly lit truck stop, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called the state police and told them everything. The clerk, the dead phone, the noise, the two men in my doorway. They took my statement, but I could hear the skepticism in the dispatcher's voice. I never heard back from them. A week later, I looked up the Starlight online. There were no news articles, no reports of a crime. There was just a single, one-sentence review on a travel site from 3 years prior. It said, "Don't stay at the end of the hall." I wonder how many other travelers were offered that nice, quiet room. I wonder how many of them didn't get out in time. I was a sales rep for a small pharmaceutical company, which is a fancy way of saying I spent 3 weeks out of every month driving through the forgotten parts of Appalachia, trying to convince small-town doctors to buy our new brand of antacids. The job paid well, but it was a lonely existence, defined by long highways and cheap motels. The Oakland Lodge, nestled in a stretch of West Virginia woods, was my stop for the night. It was a standard 2-story affair, the kind of place where the ice machine is always broken and the carpets smell like damp regret. I checked in, got my key for room 214, and hauled my sample case up the creaking outdoor staircase. As I got to my door, I noticed the man in the room next to mine, 212. He was on his hands and knees on the concrete walkway, scrubbing a small, dark spot with a brush and a spray bottle. He worked with a strange, intense focus, his movements precise and repetitive. He was dressed in khaki pants and a neatly pressed polo shirt, looking more like a suburban dad on a weekend cleaning spree than a guest at a rundown motel. He didn't look up as I passed, his attention completely absorbed by his task. I locked my door behind me and dropped my bags. The room was what I expected, tired, brown, and functional. I ate a stale granola bar from my briefcase and tried to unwind, but I couldn't shake the image of the man next door. It was just odd. Later that night, as I was trying to sleep, I started hearing noises through the wall. It wasn't a TV or an argument. It was the distinct, rhythmic sound of cleaning, followed by the squeak of a cloth on a hard surface. It went on for hours. There were no breaks, no pauses. Just the steady, methodical sound of someone scrubbing their room from top to bottom in the middle of the night. At one point, a sharp, chemical smell, like industrial-strength bleach, seeped under the adjoining door. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I buried my face in a pillow, telling myself it was just some eccentric neat freak, and eventually fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, as I was heading to my car, the man from 212 was outside again. He was wiping down the door of his room with a clean white cloth. He looked up as I approached and gave me a polite, almost vacant smile. "Morning," he said. His voice was calm and even. He was clean-shaven, and his clothes were immaculate. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Headed out for the day?" he asked, his eyes briefly flicking to my sample case. "Gotta be careful on these roads. Easy to get turned around out here. A man could disappear, and no one would find him for weeks." He said it with the same pleasant tone someone might use to comment on the weather. A chill crept down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Right. Well, have a good one," I mumbled and walked quickly to my car. As I drove away, I could feel his eyes on me. My day was a blur of failed sales pitches and bad coffee. All I could think about was the man in room 212. I considered finding a different motel for the night, but a stubborn part of me refused to be spooked by a weird neighbor. It was just a guy who liked to clean. I got back to the Oakland Lodge just after sunset. The man's car, a nondescript brown sedan, was still parked in its spot. The light was on in his room. I went into my own room, locked the deadbolt, and wedged a chair under the knob. I told myself I was being paranoid. The sound started again around 10 p.m. But this time it wasn't cleaning. It was a series of dull, heavy thuds. It sounded like someone was repeatedly dropping a heavy bag of laundry, or maybe tenderizing a large piece of meat. The rhythm was steady, almost meditative. It went on for 20 minutes, then stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. I sat on the edge of my bed, every muscle in my body tensed. My curiosity warred with my fear, and curiosity won. I had to see what was happening. The rooms had large windows facing the parking lot. If I turned off my lights, I might be able to see into his room without being seen. I killed the lights and crept to the window, pulling the curtain back an inch. His curtains were partially open, offering a narrow slice of his room. What I saw made the air freeze in my lungs. The man was on the floor, on his knees. The motel room's cheap art and the headboard from the bed had been removed from the wall and were stacked neatly in a corner. He had a large, rolled-up object in front of him, wrapped in thick, industrial plastic sheeting. It was roughly the size and shape of a human body. He wasn't panicked or rushed. He was working with the same calm, meticulous focus I'd seen earlier, pulling a roll of duct tape taut and carefully sealing every seam. His movements were efficient, practiced. As I watched, my foot bumped the leg of the desk. It wasn't a loud noise, but in the silence, it felt like a gunshot. The man in room 212 stopped what he was doing. He slowly lifted his head, and his blank eyes turned directly toward my window. He stared right at me. He couldn't have seen me in the dark, but he knew. He knew I was watching. He didn't move. He didn't smile. He just stared into the darkness where I stood, holding my gaze for a long, terrifying moment. Then he calmly returned to his work, pulling another strip of tape and pressing it firmly onto the plastic. I stumbled back from the window, my heart a frantic hammering against my ribs. He saw me. He knows I saw him. I had to leave. I grabbed my keys and wallet, leaving everything else behind. I listened at the door, but I couldn't hear him. I couldn't hear anything. My plan was to wait until he left with whatever that was. 10 minutes later, I heard the door of 212 open and close. Footsteps moved down the walkway. A car door opened, then shut. An engine started. I waited, listening, until the sound of the engine faded down the road. This was my chance. I yanked the chair away, unlocked the door, and sprinted down the stairs and across the lot to my car. I threw myself inside, jamming the key into the ignition. As I slammed the car into drive and squealed out of the parking space, my headlights swept across the far end of the lot. And there, parked in the shadows under a large oak tree, was the brown sedan. The engine was off. The lights were out. The man was sitting in the driver's seat, his head turned, watching me. He had never left. He had just moved his car and waited. I didn't hesitate. I floored it, roaring past him and onto the highway. I didn't look in my rearview mirror. I just drove, pushing my car as fast as it would go, until the lights of the Oakwood Lodge were long gone. An hour later, I pulled into a crowded, brightly lit gas station and called the police. They took my statement and investigated. They found the room, number 212, unlocked and empty. They told me it was the cleanest motel room they had ever seen. The carpets had been shampooed, the bathroom was scrubbed sterile, and the only smell was the overwhelming scent of bleach. There was no sign of the man, no evidence he had ever been there, except for the faint, dark stain on the concrete walkway right where I had first seen him scrubbing.